there was so much joy in storytelling. Like you could have a terrible day, but hear an amazing story and it just changes everything for you. I think it changes us on a fundamental level.
Where do you see that most people get stuck? Because I'm assuming your clients probably have to give you these things, right? If I could write these things down, what do you feel like are some common, whether it's missteps or kind of roadblocks for people being able to provide those steps that you just gave?
Yeah, there are probably a few. And I think the first starts with confidence. So one, believing that their story isn't worthy of an audience or isn't important enough or isn't like traumatic enough to warrant any kind of attention, because we are like, America loves trauma in terms of like memoir and story. Like, let's just talk about that for a little bit. So you don't have to be traumatized in like, I don't know, a conventional sense to be able to tell your story and have it help other people. Your story as it is matters. And so believing in that as a fundamental step is super important for not letting like the criticism in your head take over and stop you from moving forward.
Pivot in your confidence, career, and compensation with the 5-Minute Career Hack podcast every Monday and Thursday. Now get ready for a special interview curated just for you.
Welcome back to another episode of the 5-Minute Career Hack. I'm your host, Alicia, and we have Cher Hale today, right? I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Okay. So just to give a preview, I already shared with Cher that, like, my Houston accent comes out all the time. So before I tell people, I always lead with that. So we're going to get through this today and learn a ton. But I'm so excited. As always, as you know, we have 2 episodes every week that we try to do with the 5-Minute Career Hack. One is a topic that we bring forward as professionals, mostly topics that we didn't do very well, that we've learned, and we try to research and bring forward to our audience. And the other episode is always with an interview. And I feel like our audience gets blessed in both spaces because there's just so much value and exposure, and knowing things that are there and hearing our guests' journeys and their pathways. So as much as an expertise that we get from our guests, we get that in their life's journey. So first, I just want to thank you for creating space and your life's work. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's beautiful. It's fall. I love fall weather. So I am here and relaxed. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Awesome. Well, I'm going to read a short bio and then I would love for you to say a little bit more about you. I think it's real easy to sum it up in 5 minutes, right? When we think about this, but it's years and years, in many cases, I'll age myself decades and how we got here, right? But for those that are wondering, we have Cher here, who is the founder and director of Ginkgo PR, an agency that uses public relations to create a more equitable media landscape. As a Taiwanese Black American woman, Cher is passionate about leveraging the power of the media to take back narratives that have been traditionally told for under-recognized authors and entrepreneurs. While she's not pitching, you can find her revising her first novel, which I can't wait to hear about that, rollerblading or hiking anywhere near water. So she lives in Spokane, right? We had this conversation. I'm gonna tell y'all this joke and why I share with you all. Washington, which is unceded Coeur d'Alene tribe territory, with her 3-year-old daughter. So welcome to the show. So excited to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Alicia.
Awesome. So I know you hear this all the time as people read back your bio, but what stands out for you today when you hear me share and introduce you? Is there anything that stands out more today?
Definitely the bit about the novel. Writing fiction has become such a major, like, evolutionary practice in my life. And it's become so important to me over the past year, but has been important to me over the arc of my entire life.
Awesome. Have you always identified or described yourself as a writer?
No, definitely not. For a long time, I was just like someone who dabbled in writing. And now, having finished a novel, it feels more official to say that I'm a writer, even if it's not published.
Awesome. Well, we're now we can say writer, right? And CEO and founder of a PR firm. So so tell us a little bit more about yourself. What would you like the audience to know about what's new in your life in this chapter now and what's ahead? I'm curious.
Hmm. What's new in this chapter? Being the most present parent that I can be. Parenting is such a challenge. It just requires and demands so much of me that I definitely have taken the business and made it secondary,
Mm.
which it used to be like the priority of my life. Um, and I put all of my energy into it. And now I would say that I am parent first, business owner second.
Oh, that's so awesome. And I can say, I can attest to it. I think that came forward in just our first intro of trying to schedule this time of, right, I have my daughter at this time. And I would like, for me, it was a shock because I was just like assuming and hearing what you weren't saying, right? Of like, oh, okay, we can do it this day. And you're like, nope, I have these days at this time. And it was so on purpose for me, like even like what you weren't saying. And I definitely know a lot of women struggle with that, right? Of like, how do you get here to prioritize that? Sometimes forced, right? But just to your point, making that a priority and just being so on brand with that. So what was the process of getting to mom first, business second? Because that's a huge shift, like you said, of like all your time was going into your business. I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, before I had my daughter, her name was Kiara,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was definitely the person who would like pride myself on working 40 to like 60-hour weeks, depending on what was priority. And after I had her, you walk through a portal in
Mm,
parenthood is what I can best describe it as.
yeah.
Because once I had her, I was like, wow, there are so many irrelevant tasks that I've been doing in my business and in my life. Like the idea of cutting things out just became so much more possible than before. And the idea of standing up for myself to create boundaries and enforce those boundaries was fundamental. And
Mm.
once I was able to do those things, I was like, oh, look at all this time that has opened up for me to both be a parent and to pursue the passions that I've had for a really long time.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful because I'll say in my journey of learning what boundaries are beyond using them, but before I didn't really feel comfortable with boundaries because I thought it was for other people. And today I realized the boundary is for me, right? Like I know me. And in order for me to show up my best self, this is a boundary that I'm putting here. And I think that's helped empower me. So even the way you were describing it, hopefully someone's empowered today to found maybe one more boundary, right? Like maybe that one that's going to help them be more of themselves or more present. So great tip. Are you feeling stuck in your career? Are you ready to stop going through the motions? Are you ready to start living on purpose? Well, here's the thing. I'm going to say something very radical. Throw away your goals. Oh my gosh, right? Stop looking at them. Secure your spot today for Burn the Rulebook Career Transformation Lab and get ready to take action and transform your future. Over 3 days, we'll help you prepare, position, and live on purpose in both your career and your life. We will help you find balance. Deep dive into strategies designed to help you stop playing by the rules that have held you back and take control of your future. We'll give you the tools to execute with confidence so that you're not just talking about it and looking at it and hoping for change, you're making it happen. How did you get so clear and so on purpose with this life's work that you're doing now?
Well, you know that I'm a publicist, which
Yeah.
means that I usually cold pitch people all day long, every day, people who are not looking for my emails in their inboxes. And I was thinking about where this skill set really began. And the first story that came to mind was when I was 14 years old, Atusa Rubenstein was the editor of 17 magazine. And
Mm.
she had a show on network about like finding interns for the magazine. I remember watching this show and thinking like, man, if I can't be a writer, maybe I can be an editor of a magazine. I can move to New York City, be fancy and very cool. And in my 14-year-old mind, I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to email Atusa now. And I'm going to see if maybe I can like create a relationship with her so that when it's time for me to become an intern, I'll be top of mind. So I cold emailed Atusa Rubenstein, founder of Cosmo Girl, editor of Studies Magazine, and she responded with the most lovely, detailed, insightful, and encouraging email that I have like today ever received. And it was just such a powerful affirmation of one, to always reach out, even if people feel unattainable, and to nurture connections where you can, because it's possible that you can learn something from everybody. So I took that lesson and I began working in the nonprofit space and then got an internship for PR actually with a local self-published author. And I translated those skills into digital marketing online. This was like right when, like 2012, 2011, when digital business was like becoming a real thing. And then eventually moved into, at 25, into my own business after freelancing and hostessing on the Strip for quite a long time. So 25 was when I began my business full time. And people were asking me to pitch podcasts for them. And I was like, no, that sounds silly. Like, why would that ever be a thing? But I thought, let me just give it a try. Began to do it. And within like 6 or 9 months, it was the #1 service in my business and created such a generation of referrals. And I thought, maybe there's something here. And so I went full time with that. And I'll tell you the truth though, after a while, I looked at my client roster and I was like, wow, all of my clients are white female life coaches who are all upper middle class. And I'm telling the same story over and over again. And like, can this get any more boring? And they were all lovely people. Like, I will not discount them as individuals. Of course, their stories are important. I was just tired of telling those stories. And then unfortunately, my mother at 49 passed away. And it was a heart attack. And in her 40s, she had discovered a passion for writing novels. They were all like spicy romance novels in the Umbrian countryside in Italy. And I'd helped her edit these novels, and her dream was to publish them one day, but she didn't get a chance to. And after her death, I thought, man, I have the skill set to help people like her and like myself tell our stories with our own voices. Like, why am I not doing that? And I really had to take a hard look at my life and look around my network and say, how many people look like me and how many stories am I equipped to tell of those populations? And I just blew up my whole business and I transferred everything. I put all of my energy into telling stories from those populations because I believe that those stories can reduce negative stereotypes. It can increase unity and it can help. It's so affirming to have that attention on our stories. And we need it. We need that affirmation. We need that validation.
Wow, that's so awesome. I want just a couple of things that stood out to me about you, and I'm sure the audience will hear this as well, is it sounds like, and I'm asking this as a question, make an assumption here. It sounds like you've always been very clear, or at least at a very young age as a girl, very clear on what your skill set was. Because I just picture, I love 17 magazine. So I definitely am older than you, but I remember like walking to like the corner store to like look at Source and look at Vibe. So to your point, I have a different experience around not seeing myself, right? But where I did, it was just vibrant, right? And it just was such a connection that had no audio, right? Like it didn't have moving parts. It was like on print, but I was so connected. So I just, as you were telling that story, like the picture of seeing this magazine, it's young people there doing this thing. And then to think, I'm going to do that. I can do that. Let me find the editor and reach, like in my mind, I'm just like, okay, Cher knew who she was. And I'm just picturing this so just empowered young girl. Like, would you describe yourself that way at that age?
You know, I wouldn't. I would say that I knew that words were my skill set. I knew that I loved words. I didn't know that I was good at them, I guess, is the
Gotcha.
truth.
Okay.
And I didn't have anyone to really foster that love of words in me. If my parents who were immigrants did anything, it was to say, find a skill set that's going to pay you money. So I thought, I don't know if I can write fiction for a living, but I can parlay my love of words into creating content for people who want to read them. And that was maybe a moment of inspiration struck me emailing it to. So I'm not really sure what it was, but I did have this deep sense of, let me try to create an opportunity for myself where there currently is none.
Oh, I love that. Definitely. When I listen back to this, like that's such a bar, right? Of like, hey, I don't necessarily see myself as a strong, empowered person, but I do know I need to create an opportunity for me to do that. Wow, thanks for sharing that perspective. Because for me, I'm always inspired by people that can take the accountability of failure. Right. Like if it doesn't work, like you saying, hey, I need an internship, but if I don't get it, right, like I got to keep going. So that's so dope. Thank you for sharing that. So fast forward, you're getting really clear on like, hey, this story is nice, but maybe it's good, but there's a better. And today I know you're very clear on the populations that you want to write stories for. So tell us a little bit more about that and who your current clients are, or maybe in general of like where that has led you today with your love of words.
Yes. So right now, I allocate 70% of my client roster to Black, Indigenous folks of color, the queer community, or disabled individuals. And I allocate the remaining 30% to vocal social justice advocates or allies of causes. Um, I find that that spread is really supportive of both my ethos and my values. And if I'm going to spend so many hours on this earth, I want to spend it telling those stories or writing those stories.
Stories. Thank you so much. So let's talk about that audience, and I think let's get started with the art of storytelling. It is. I'm curious. Before I share my opinion, like what has storytelling done for you?
Mm. Oh my gosh. What a moving question. It has offered me the gift of empathy first and foremost. This ability to look through someone else's eyes and perceive their world from their perspectives and their value set and their experiences. Um, Learning empathy as I would say a young adult was so critical for me, seeing like, wow, there was more than just me. I am not the center of the universe, which of course every teenager thinks. But it was fundamental for me to learn that lesson there. I think too the ability to use words to influence and to create movement. I was very activisty growing up, and I would always analyze like this foundation is using this story and it's working in this way. Um, so the power of influence and then action, subsequent action because of that influence. And then I would say the power to like delight, right? Like there is so much joy in storytelling. Like you could have a terrible day, but hear an amazing story and it just changes everything for you. I think it changes us on a fundamental level. And I owe stories so much for the gift they offer.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I think I'm a lover of books. So I'll share this in common. Definitely, and not I haven't worked on my craft in such a long time, but and similar to you, it was something that was kind of, as a young girl, it was always seen as people that had a skill set in science or math, right, were smarter. And even though you can get great grades in English or history, those things like that, it wasn't necessarily promoted. So if you're sharing what you wanted to be when you grew up, to your point, like writer or things like that, I didn't think were available for me. So it never ever came up in that way. But I've always had this love for writing and writing poems. And as I was kind of reading your bio, it that came back to me of like, where did that go? Right? Like, where does that go when you have this love? So to your point of like how it's gotten this place of like a heartfelt place around empathy, around how you use it to influence and still creating opportunities is, definitely resonating with me of picturing how something can start in one place and just being on this journey of like going in other places. So I'm curious, how do you do that for your clients of like they give you these things, they say, hey, I want to do this. Then what happens next? Like how do you pull that forward?
Yeah, my clients are so wonderful and smart, and they've had incredible life stories that they want to tell through their work, but they often can't see their own brilliance. This is just the truth, I think, of being a human. And so I almost work as a translator, right? They tell me what they've experienced, what they've learned, and I say, oh, actually, like this and this and this makes you special. This makes you stand out in the media space. And so I won't say special in a generic way of like in the world, but in the media space specifically, right? When I think about their stories, here's what podcasters or producers or editors are looking for. So I can see the gems, which feels a little bit mystical, honestly, in nature. I can take the gems and I can say, let's create compelling talking points or compelling editorial headlines and pitch these to editors so that they can say yes or no based on what they currently need for their year. And that's really what it comes down to is who are you? What makes you stand out in this space? And how can we communicate it in a way that really speaks to people who are receiving it?
Awesome. Thank you. So what advice do you have for people who may not be able to contract someone to do this for them, right? So I'm thinking about the listener right now that is really trying to position themselves, right? I hear you saying that. Figure out, how do I differentiate my voice if that's what I want to do? Um, and how can I tell my story? So what do you think is important? Because it's like this whisperer, right? And you're hearing what people are saying and helping them craft it. How can we do that for ourselves? Like, what tip would you give just the everyday person is trying to get better in this place in the workforce?
Yeah, I would say depending on how you learn best, there are three different ways. One is to journal. That's just find some prompts about, maybe write out your whole career journey, lessons you learned, challenges you encountered, moments where you demonstrated amazing resilience or self-belief or persistence, and read back through it and just highlight points where you're like, that stands out, and trust that knowing, right? Trust the knowing of like, yes, that stands out. Two is and you can do all these all at once too as well. Ask a friend or a trusted colleague, or just say, hey, can you ask me these questions? Kind of like a role play Q&A, and like record yourself and see what comes up. Listen back to it, which can be like excruciating sometimes for people, but no one will hear it but you. Listen back and say, that stands out, and write the timestamps down so you can go back and transcribe them, or use AI, whatever. I don't know. We're living in the future now. And I feel like these two methods as a starting place are a really solid foundation for sifting through your life experience and finding what comes out. Once you're there, you can create snappier talking points, things like why this happened, how this happened to me, and what I learned from XYZ, or strategies that help me overcome this and that. Once you see the formulaic structure of a talking point, it's actually quite easy to emulate. It's a matter of like the background though, right? The foundation of the talking point, not so much the structure of the talking point or the structure of the pitch. It's really about you and the raw material you bring to the table.
Some great starting points. Where do you see that most people get stuck? Because I'm assuming your clients probably have to give you these things, right? If I could write these things down, what do you feel like are some common, whether it's missteps or kind of roadblocks for people being able to provide those steps that you just gave?
Yeah, there are probably a few. And I think the first starts with confidence. So one, believing that their story isn't worthy of an audience, or isn't important enough, or isn't like traumatic enough to warrant any kind of attention, because we are like, America loves trauma in terms of like memoir and story. Like, let's just talk about that for a little bit. So you don't have to be traumatized in like, I don't know, a conventional sense to be able to tell your story and have it help other people. Your story as it is matters. And so believing in that as a fundamental step is super important for not letting like the criticism in your head take over and stop you from ever moving forward. The other roadblock is feeling like you don't have the right words. I'm a word person. I get it. Like I want to have the words that capture the essence of who I am and who I'm becoming and what I want to say. And I never have the right words, right? I have the right words for right now. And that's all that you can really do. You can operate at that kind of minimum baseline. And so like, let the words you find be enough. Play with them, sure, refine them, yes, but let them be enough as they stand, because you're only going to learn about what you need to say as you pitch, not before. Wow. You learn in co-creation with the receiver.
Yeah, that's so awesome, because the first thing I wrote down when you gave the first tip was like, trust the knowing. And I captured that of like, that gut feeling, right? But then as you brought forward the confidence, it was like, well, if you're not a confident person, you may never get that internal cue. So that's just such great work. And, that is work, right? Like to trust your gut, like you have to know, like, what is that voice? What is the yes for me? So love that tip. I'm taking that for myself. So thank you so much for that. And then I think the other part is like the words. And I think, especially when you think about these communities that you serve and that you are working towards, those are real things, right? Like, I'm not saying this right, whatever cultural norms are there in regards to what successful looks like, what strong looks like, being humble, right? Like those are like towering strengths that you should have. So these things could be pressed down and never cultivated. So this work of journaling and going back and recordation well, for some may seem really easy, could be extremely painful and almost like anti everything I've been taught, whether that's from a faith or cultural ethnicity standpoint, right? When I think about these groups that you're there. So how do you maybe work through that with your clients?
Yeah, I would say that I am very clear with all of my clients that I don't work with anybody who has any kind of visibility trauma that they haven't personally worked through themselves. So
So
as
you
someone
got
who
to do
has
the
worked
work
through my,
first.
yeah, so I worked through my own trauma.
Love
I
it.
have this face. There's no hiding from it, right? I've been through my own idea of like
Yeah.
racism and marginalization, and I really had to work through therapy and other modalities to like find a peace in self-acceptance, and I'm always learning more. And so I can usually tell when someone hasn't made peace yet with who they are, where they're at, and they're just not ready to work with me in this capacity. So I always recommend therapy, specifically somatic therapy for this kind of trauma, because you really need both body and mind involved in the healing process.
Love that. Love that. So that's a nice way where Cher's like, go get it together and then come talk to me. But seriously though, right? Like you can't be this public figure or want to tell a story because it won't, that's a part of the storytelling for it to resonate, right? Like that could be a block. So thank you for sharing that. So next question I have around, or what came to mind around storytelling is we hear a lot around authenticity. So how in this and in the workplace, this whole like bringing your whole self or like I want to be my whole self. What do you find is the balance between, where storytelling lies in this want to be authentic, which you should, right? But then like, how do I bring my whole self? Like, do you advise people to do that? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Such a sticky topic. The first thought that I have is there's a tendency, and this is, I would say, primarily in the entrepreneurial space, not so much like the corporate space, but in that space where I live, a tendency to say that, like, if I'm vulnerable, if I'm transparent, this is like very influencer driven, also, right? Then I will be authentic. And so people just like trauma dump on other people, or they like tell, I don't want to see you in your bed in the morning. Like these are things I don't need to see. But people feel compelled to share these parts of their lives with others because it's like what makes them famous. And so I have a strong self belief that like you don't have to share everything to be authentic. There are some things that you can keep for yourself, especially if you haven't done the work yet. Like if you are showing up in a corporate space and you're not quite ready to share one aspect of yourself, you don't have to. You can do the work personally and privately first. And then as you feel ready, you can work up to that. It takes courage to be ourselves. There's a reason that it's so difficult, that we hear this advice ad nauseum. If it were easy, we'd all be doing it, but it requires a practice of self-belief. And so I think you really have to work up to authenticity along a spectrum, right? Like just because you're not 100% authentic doesn't mean that you aren't authentic to who you are in this moment. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. I've been unpacking this, whatever you want to call it. We'll call it a box of authentic, like maybe the umbrella is authenticity. And one thing that I've learned in this season, because I've, started with like kind of like probably prompts that are like, who would you say is an example of that? Like, I think that always, because we have a picture, right? Like, who is someone that comes across to you or it resonates? And I've done that work of like listing those people and thinking about it. And then I think for me, I won't say for other people, using that as a guide, we won't say model, a guide. What I have learned is that they practice at doing that. And sometimes we can see someone and it just maybe it's a story we're making up. I'll say for myself, when I say we, it's me. Maybe we're making up that it's easy for that person, right? Like, oh, they're just naturally this great storyteller, right? Or like the way they tell their story as a mom and this business person or whatever, it just seems so fluid, right? And what they're pulling forward and I would probably say where I've been naive and I'm working through is like that person usually has a team behind them, right? And I think this is why exposure is so great. And there's someone that's like, wow, there's someone that does this work, listening to this podcast now. That's like, I had no clue. I just thought this person showed up and not realizing they have someone that actually wrote that. They took their words, curated it in this way, and it's a reason why it resonated with you because you are the target audience, right? Like you are their people. And so yes, it makes perfect sense the way you were describing it, because I've had to work through all these assumptions. I'll say that I was making around, like, I have the word authentic. In my mind, I thought I knew what it looked like. And then now kind of learning and trying to work through my own journey of like my storytelling and what you bring forward, of now learning, like, to your point, no, it's not. It's way more than that, right? So definitely that's what, when I hear you say that, that's what comes forward for me.
Mm.
Yeah. So when you think about storytelling, if you are coaching someone now, like, how does a person kind of sort through what they bring forward and what maybe they leave? So you gave a great example of like, hey, we all have the picture of the person that's probably going live when they're crying, right? Or like brushing their teeth and like, but let's say we're not that extreme, right? And they're somewhere maybe in the middle of trying to figure out in crafting their story, how do I keep some, how do I choose what to keep for myself? Like, what is the process of that, if there is one?
Yeah, because the tricky part is like, what's your edge, right?
Mm.
Some stories are scary to tell, but you're ready to tell them. And then some stories are too tender to tell. And so what's the line between my edge and too tender? And I think sometimes you're going to get it wrong, quite frankly. Sometimes I've told stories to people that I thought I trusted, or to audiences even, and I was like, ooh, probably should have kept that one away for a little bit longer. I might need to unpack this a bit more. And you can usually tell if you're having excessive emotion while telling the story. That's a good indicator that not quite time. You haven't processed fully what happened. And then maybe too, if it feels too stale, if you feel too far away from it, and if you're not living in the emotion of the story, probably isn't the right time to tell it. So it's a lot of like listening to your body, right? Like, how is my body responding to these stories? And like I said, sometimes you'll get it wrong. And so if you don't have access to your body in that same way, because I know we don't all have that access, that kind of remorseful feeling of like, man, I didn't get that one right this time, then let's keep this one away for later.
I love that. It's definitely a great barometer for us to even try on, right? Of like, maybe I wasn't even tuned in to those emotions. So really great tips. Any other tips before we move on that came to mind, maybe that I didn't ask?
When it comes to storytelling, I mean, personal branding is so important right now in the corporate space. I would say that the more detailed you can be, which feels counterproductive, the more detailed you can be, the more you will connect with others. So don't be afraid to put in cute details like my Atusa story earlier, right? Where it's like, maybe this just happened to me. This is so singular, but you felt a resonant emotion attached to that story because you have your own world experiences. So I would say, don't be afraid to be like personal or quirky or fun in telling your personal brand stories, because recruiters and colleagues will connect with those details. They're also humans, right? So there's like just a movement toward more humanity in our corporate profiles, I would say.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And it also sounds like, to your point, be okay with personalizing that, because I think that's the work. You can't maybe go find a template and say whatever. Like as you were speaking, it was reminding me, I've started jobs before, and like they have maybe this like generic tell me about you kind of template, right? Which is fine, right? Like, it's nothing wrong with that. Of like, hey, if this is relevant to the brand, of like, what's your favorite piece of clothing, or what do you not leave home without? But does that give people any more about you? So as you were saying that, it's like, okay, that may feel like going against the grain in some cultures, but that's the whole point of people needing to know you in those environments. Like the people that, if you do have direct reports, they're going to want to know about you more. And that doesn't mean you have to tell everything, but to your point, be very selective around the details that you want to share. Like, detail doesn't mean a lot. And I think some people hear detail as a lot, and it doesn't. It could actually be two things, right? It can be, hey, I'm a diverse woman and I'm a mother. And that's the lens at which I lead and my values. And knowing that may be just enough to know a lot about me. right?
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, right? We're being strategically detailed in alignment with your values so that you can show up with a perception that you want to offer others.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Well, as we're getting to the end, I know it goes by pretty fast. I'm curious, like, what trends are you seeing in your industry currently that you think the audience can learn from?
Hmm. I would say in line with the personal brand, 'cause I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast are in corporate space. Don't be afraid to get on podcast yourself and create your own platform, right? As we seek for jobs, as we try to land more clients, differentiation in terms of a platform, in terms of reputation, really makes a huge impact. So put yourself out for opportunities that maybe you didn't think were in alignment with like your position, because there are so many podcasts like this one. People need to hear your story, and that, I think, it puts you in a favorable light with recruiters and with other companies and with your colleagues as well. So don't be afraid to look for spaces like that where you can tell your story and you can be a human.
Yeah, I love that. Because I think what I hear you saying there, I saw that was one of the things that drew me to asking you, like, hey, would you want to be a guest? It'll be something for people to learn. But it was as I was doing that and learning more about you and getting ready for this interview, that was something I wrote as a takeaway for me. Like, I'm setting up trying to do these interviews, but where could it be for me to go? Because I think either way, if you're in a position where you're always asking the questions, being on the other side, putting yourself in a situation to think and speak on your feet, having to practice on a topic, all of those things are ways you can upskill yourself, right? And also practice diversity. Like if you're always talking to people that you work with, to your point, that's how your stories do become stale because it's the same as everybody around you. So that could even spark some creativity for you if you go have this conversation and you never know what light bulb moments come from even just getting prepared for those.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. Well, this is how we normally end, but before we do, like I'll kind of tease it out there since you are a woman who has shared that she is a lover word. So I know you will love this portion of we always end with asking our guests if they have 5 words, hence it being a 5-minute career hack, 5 words that they would like to leave with the audience. And it doesn't have to be a complete sentence. The 5 words don't even necessarily have to go together. So there's no rules. But I'm curious of like, what 5 words would you want to leave with the audience today?
Yes, what feels most present for me in this season of my life is this: practice self-belief every day.
I have to write that down and I'm going to say it back. Practice self-belief every day. Love that. Do you want to give some context of why that feels so present for you?
Yeah, I just spent so much of my life not believing in myself. And as I finished my first novel, I thought, man, how many novels could I have had in the archive already if I just decided to believe in myself sooner?
That's so awesome.
We
Yeah.
don't do it enough. We don't do it enough. And I think the same goes for um, believing that I am a good a good parent who's the right fit for my daughter, believing that I have what it takes to do what I want to do, believing that I'm worthy of my dreams, right? If we just believe in ourselves sooner, we waste less time, and we have so little time here on earth. So I urge everybody to just say, what's one small step I can take to practice self-belief today, to get myself a little closer to believing that I am worthy of those dreams.
hmm Yeah. So many gifts inside of us, right? Love that. Well, thank you so much for your time, for your work, for being a voice and creating a space for people to find their voice. I'm curious, how can we support you here? Are there any projects or anything that you're working on? Obviously, we'll put it in our show notes, but any way that the team here and the audience can support you?
Yeah, I just rebranded my Substack. It's called Doing It for the Attention. And I'm obsessed with this idea because we make attention a dirty, bad word. And I want us to reclaim it because attention is liberating and attention is validating and healing. And it also creates movements. Like we need attention on our liberatory creative work. And so I just talk about rejection and healing and creative work. And any kind of trade insider secrets for those who want to get their work on a larger stage in that Substack.
Love that. And if our audience is compelled and they want to work with you and they feel like, oh my gosh, you can help me. I think I fit the criteria in the audience that you work with. Where can they find you?
They can find me at ginkgopr.com. That's ginkgopr.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you, audience, for joining us for another week here at the 5-Minute Career Hack. As always, I'm always blessed by this space. I learn so much each week and each time that I even listen to the episodes that my co-founders do as well. And today was no different. So thank you so much. And we'll see you all next time.
I truly hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed doing it for you. However, it doesn't have to end there. Come on over to our Facebook group community right now. You're going to get exclusive content that we weren't able to include in this episode as well as past episodes. We've got challenges, we've got research, we've got lives, you name it, all for you in bite-sized chunks so that you can continue this development journey. Go ahead, click the link right now in the description show notes, and we'll see you there.